Let's go back to the mid-1860s, right here in Germantown. Pretend you're walking around town. Germantown's its own town. And if you're walking around, you might see people in shops using their hands making shoes or creating horse-drawn wagons. There's a weaving co-op over here. You would enjoy seeing a variety of Victorian homes and gardens dotting the landscape. The stories at the kitchen tables and in the shops are alive of the ending of slavery and the revolution for independence. Underground railroad stations had served courageous people on their dangerous journeys to freedom, and American and British soldiers had fought battles on these cobblestone streets, including Germantown Avenue and Schoolhouse Lane. By 1865, many people felt joy and relief about the abolition of slavery and the holding together of the Union. However, their souls surely ached deeply from the racism, blood, death, and loss suffered throughout the country in unimaginable levels of tragedy. Partly in response to the overwhelming national context, and given the fact that there was local strong support for religious pluralism, Germantown was founded in 1683 by 13 Quaker families seeking religious tolerance, part of William Penn's Holy Experiment. This was all alive in the people here in Germantown when they decided to create a new church home. They envisioned a community of commitment in which they would strive to live out their highest aspirations. Sacred places have sacred names: the Garden of Eden, Angkor Wat, Machu Picchu. Our forefathers and mothers named this place the Unitarian Society of Germantown. Under the leadership of the first minister, Reverend W.W. Newell, USG figured out that they needed a space for worship and programs, and they hired a wonderful Unitarian architect, Frank Furness, to design a gorgeous building on Cheltenham Green, which would provide a sense of integrity and connection with the holy. When you study the history of this congregation over its 150 years, you see people have been doing what the minister, Reverend David Park, preached about during his tenure here in the 1970s. He was talking back, describing the cultural DNA of this church. Reverend Park said, "This congregation in worship draws its strength from beyond itself and empowers those who commit their lives to its work. Corporately in prophecy, the church extends its circle of solidarity to include the poor, the oppressed, the hungry, reaching out to persons in need, and challenging structures of injustice. We are all a part of serving and being served," when you read that. David Park was preaching over 100 years after the founding, but his words aptly described how in different contexts, generation after generation of people of this church faced challenges and opportunities, and they did their best to answer the moral questions of the day. One example, Hal Krieger has uncovered, which is just truly remarkable. I did not know about this one. Among the founding members of USG in 1865 was Emily Annette Winslow Taylor. Her son became very famous. Frederick Taylor was known in circles as the founder of industrial engineering and mass production. He's a fascinating figure in American history, business and manufacturing. But his mother, and that was always the theme of the Unitarian and the Universalist power women, Emily Taylor was an ardent abolitionist and co-worker with Lucretia Mott, one of the top Quaker abolitionists. In 1840, Emily Taylor was a delegate to the world's first anti-slavery convention, which took place in London, England. The call for that convention invited delegates from all global anti-slavery organizations, and accordingly, several American societies saw it fit to send women as delegates to represent them in that august assembly. The conveners in London, however, were not prepared and in some ways did not welcome women as former delegates. The Europeans were about to meet the progressive, liberal American women coming over with resiliency and tenacity. Emily Taylor and her colleagues were not about to turn around on the boat and go home. They were not about to take a back seat on an issue that mattered. And you just have to think this, 1840, even if you have a lot of money, you're taking a boat across the Atlantic. The journey itself sees people perish. And that's my kind of a USG person. And thank the heavens, the countless brave people like Emily Taylor have carried on this tradition of living out the powerful promise that each member can embody the fullness of the church in bearing witness to our faith. In the wake of the Civil War, USG Minister Reverend Charles Ames declared that USG bear witness with a spirit of responsibility for the welfare of the wider community, beyond our own little group, he said. We're not just about this little crew. USG led in direct aid recovery efforts in the 1870s, establishing Germantown Relief, an agency that many looked as a model upon as they developed their own in their communities around the country. Reverend Ames also wanted to share the good news about liberal religion and the gospel beyond the walls of the church. He began preaching and bringing music downtown to the Spring Garden Institute, which eventually developed into its own Unitarian church. Fast forward 1963, youth member Ellery Shemp and his family brought suit against the Abington Township School Board to prohibit the mandatory regular reading of the Bible in class. Controversial, intense today. Imagine what it was like in 1963. Ask Linda Bernstein what it was like. She'll tell you because her family's a part of this line of tradition as well. Up to that time, on this story, Pennsylvania law required that 10 Bible verses be read aloud at the beginning of the public school day. And this case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States and established the prohibition on religious practices being performed by the public officials in the school, opening up for other students to feel like it could be their school as well. In the 1990s, Fran Emery's in the back right now, but in the 90s she served as a USG representative on a national committee of people who reclaimed the stories of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, born in 1825 in Baltimore, African American, was a lead abolitionist, poet, suffragist, but her stories got lost. Strange how that happened to a black woman. But that we reclaimed, true American hero, and the committee Fran was on helped to reclaim it. And down in they knew where the cemetery was where she was buried. They didn't know exactly where, and they created a new gravestone. Our church was a part of that. Louis Sullivan was probably the most prolific and best known minister ever to serve in this church. He wrote, "Life is a vast sea of clouded horizons and unfathomable depths of hurricane storms and halcyon calms." He said, in the presence of this life, may we wonder, may we hope, may we worship. The USG community has accompanied people through hurricane storms of the most tragic deaths and losses, including but not limited to Nikki Brown, Jack Armstrong, Lady Bonanno, Kevin Groves, and more and more. And of course, death does not need to be tragic to involve intense grieving. We've held each other and allowed the Spirit to heal and create a new chapter in our lives. Measuring degrees of holiness is tricky business, but make no mistake, this spiritual home is holy. It's deeply etched in countless hearts, including my own. How about yours? Next time you're out on Lincoln Drive, pause a little longer than you normally are if you're a pedestrian. Take a look at the front and think about how many people have looked at our building and felt a sense of solace. And when we go back out in the Grove today to share a meal, think about how many people have looked upon the Grove with a sense of propriety and a desire for welcoming the stranger. How are we responding to the moral issues of our day? How are you responding to the issues in your life? May we draw strength from the beauty and the Spirit within and beyond us. Going forward through the ages, may we be empowered to extend our circle of solidarity and to celebrate life. Blessings be. Amen.